Are you curious about Gestalt language processing? You are not alone. Join me, Corinne Smoose, and speech therapy PD for our podcast, The Gestalt Get Together. Our episodes try to balance the enthusiasm and excitement about GLP and its associated intervention ideas, as well as a healthy dose of skepticism about how to understand and integrate this paradigm shift into your career and the field at large. We hope that you can get together with us to learn more about Gestalts.
Welcome to SLP Learning Series, a podcast series presented by SpeechTherapyPD.com. The SLP Learning Series explores various topics of speech-language pathology. Each season dives deeper into a topic with a different host and guests who are leaders in the field. Some topics include stuttering, AAC, sports concussion, teletherapy, ethics, and more. Each episode has an accompanying audio course on SpeechTherapyPD.com and is available for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Now, come along with us as we look closer into the many topics of speech-language pathology.
Hi everyone, how's it going? My name is Garrett Scudero-Yama, and I will be your SpeechTherapyPD.com host for this mini podcast series, Tunes for Talk, Music as a Tool for Speech and Language Intervention. Today is the third installment. I'm so excited for it, and it's called Get With The Beat, Exploring the Integration of Beatboxing into SLP Practices. And I mentioned before, just as a little preamble to this, that I'm an SLP and a musician, so it's just been like an honor and a pleasure to talk about how music, speech, and language are intimately related, and how music can really be a practical tool for all of us SLPs to use in a bunch of different ways. So before we get started, there's a few items to alert you to. This course is 1 hour and will be offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Financial disclosures, we each receive an honorarium from SpeechTherapyPD.com. Dr. Rusiewicz receives a salary from Duquesne as a faculty member. Her research is also supported by the Once Upon a Time Foundation, and there are no non-financial disclosures to report. I'm so excited to welcome our amazing guest this week. Heather Leavy Rusiewicz is the chair and associate professor in the Department of Speech Language Pathology and the associate dean for research in the John G. Rangos Senior School of Health Sciences at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She is also the program director of the Speech Production Clinic within the Duquesne University Speech Language and Hearing Clinic. She received her bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in communication science and disorders from the University of Pittsburgh. Before her time at Duquesne, Dr. Rusiewicz was a SLP at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh, and her clinical and research experience are focused on children and adults with speech sound disorders. Her areas of interest include gesture, prosody, and speech sound production in children and adults. She's particularly interested in the dynamic entrainment, we might talk about that after, of speech and manual movements, the lived experience of individuals with speech sound disorders and their families, and the integration of music and speech production. Additionally, that isn't enough. Dr. Rusiewicz is interested in the scholarship of teaching and learning and the education of students studying communication sciences and disorders. And lastly, she's involved in community engaged teaching and research with the aim to promote the discipline of speech and language pathology, embolden students to be civic-minded advocates for their clients, and to sustain relationships with community partners to serve the local broader community. So excited to welcome you, Dr. Rusiewicz. Just a little connective tissue for everyone. We had the pleasure of doing an ASHA presentation on beatboxing, and that was 2 years
2022.
ago.
Yeah.
Time is flying.
Exactly.
But
I had to look that up because it wasn't that long ago, but it was a moment.
yeah, both feels like it just happened and it was forever ago.
Yeah,
So,
time is a tricky thing.
Thank you so much for coming on, and so excited to talk to you again.
I love the opportunity to spend more time with you, first and foremost, Garrett. So it's truly a pleasure. And while you're talking, it's really hard for a speech language pathologist not to want to jump in. And also, I love to be involved, but that introduction was great, but also humbling. So thank you.
Of course.
It's awesome to be here.
Just with all of this stuff that you're doing, I'm just curious, can you tell us a little bit more about your superhero origin story with regards to speech therapy. How did you get started in all of this?
Oh my gosh. It was not a linear path by any means. And so I'll try to make it like the abridged version for sure. So I thought I wanted to be a physical therapist, actually. And so I have lots of electives and things that were very interesting, because whenever I decided that I didn't want to continue my biology major, I have a chem minor, which is not that common for a speech language pathology student and professional. But then I transferred schools, and I transferred out of the major just because I knew I wanted to be in healthcare in some way, but I didn't necessarily know what that was going to look like. So after checking out a couple other options, I did some soul searching. It took until my junior year of college to figure out, like, okay, what brings me joy and has really impacted me. And it actually was a lot of time that I spent with my uncle, who worked with the Special Olympics in my county that I grew up. And I would also help him with summer camps for adolescents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And that was always like my favorite time of the whole year. And it took a while for me to make a connection, like, how could that actually be a profession? And so once I found my way to speech language pathology at the University of Pittsburgh, I actually completed my undergraduate major in 2 semesters, just piled it all on and loved it. And so then continued on and didn't leave, as you said in my introduction, didn't leave the University of Pittsburgh for quite some time because of some really great opportunities, including my roles at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh, even as a master's student. So, so really grateful that I found my way.
That's awesome.
I was just even having a conversation with a friend today. I mean, what a great profession we're in, and frequently reminded this far into what I'm doing, that this is definitely what I'm meant to do. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. I really, I feel like everyone's path is a little bit meandering when it comes to this. And it was cool that you mentioned physical therapy. I know that you're interested in gesture and movement. I thought that maybe before we dive into beatboxing specifically, I'm just so curious. You mentioned something about Communimove, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. I just want to know. I want to know more. It's my own.
Yeah. So the thread of most things that I've been interested in, whether it's going back to that origin story, as you put it, or now, is that I love thinking about the prosodic characteristics of speech. So especially prosodic stress and intonation and rhythm and things like that. So along the way, I got interested in better understanding how to support children and individuals with childhood apraxia of speech because of prosodic characteristics of speech. And then along the way, in my doctoral program, I got really interested in gestures because of the co-occurrence in time. At least I wanted to study that synchronization of gestures, synchronizing in time or coordinating in time with speech movements. And then when digging into that topic, realized that there's really some clinical application to that work as well. And so using hand gestures, in particular, those that mirror what the articulatory system or even other systems of speech, respiration, and phonation, how you can use hand movements to help facilitate speech development and also speech sound targets for children and beyond. So those popping movements of our hands that mirror our pop and ba sound, and mirroring an with our hands, right? And so that's one way in which I think about this. And this connection to music as we transition. I've done some research as well with a colleague in the School of Music at Duquesne, Dr. Karen Daly. She and I quickly found out that we have some overlapping areas of not only interest of use of these hand gestures, because she uses them in a choral setting to help with not only articulatory accuracy, but vocal expressivity and artistry and things like that. So that's been a really cool line of work too. But the Communimove program that I'm just getting kind of conceptualized and getting ready to launch, hopefully in those communities that you mentioned that I'm interested in, is Communimove, so communication, but also community. So for the communa part, move for using your body, these embodied kind of connections for learning and both for speech production and overall communication enrichment, but that move part also to kind of move forward and to help support these individuals in the community to kind of have more connections and have just overall communication confidence and social communication, but with using music also and movement at the heart of those, kind of hopefully fun and engaging, as we'll talk about. But
they're all so
related in the communication enrichment and speech development and speech sound support.
Yeah, that's so cool. The one thing that you mentioned I'd never known was that you have, at the level of the, phoneme, you're even having hand gestures that are related to that. Have you heard of this? I heard of this cool little study where they restricted people's hand movements and they were no longer, they had a hard time speaking. And I also heard of something where it was like there was someone born without limbs, and they couldn't. So they kind of had phantom limbs, like they can feel their limbs, but they weren't born with them. But when they talked, they reported that they couldn't stop their limbs from moving. So even if you're born without limbs, there's this really deep connection that we have between speech and gesture.
Yeah.
So
for sure. And the influence of the two systems. And I know that's not the point of this talk, but it's really hard to disentangle that. I'm just going to, because you're talking about, I'll just say there's a magic trick that I do whenever I talk about this, and it's based on research that's been replicated a couple times, but saying a repeated syllable, and it can be something as simple as pop, 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 and you tap at the same time. But if you alternate your tap, so big tap, little tap, big tap, little tap, but you tell your audience or you tell your partner that you're working with not to change your pop. So keep on a steady pop, 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 pop. So even if our audience members try that and do like a big tap and a little tap, it's really hard not to go pop, 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 right?
Whoa, cool.
So
everyone should try that. I'm just trying in my head for a second.
But I also mention that because as we start talking about that, the relevance, continue to talk about the relevance of music, because this, as you mentioned, is the third installment of the series, and what that might bring to your SLP table, literally or figuratively. If you also integrate an embodied style of movement and learning, and also if you really capitalize on those connections, those brain connections of the hand and mouth, it's like you're just like sneaking in all of those success-based kind of strategies, while hopefully also being engaging and fun. So
yeah. Am I getting this right then? That if you actually, in the language speech practice learning process, if you're using your gestures, your hand movements, your body movements at the same time, that sort of I guess using that other sensory system along with it will help encode the information better.
Yes. And in similar to music, the literature looking at body movements, it's not just about that immediate learning. It's actually where the special sauce comes in is for the retention. So that could be learning mathematics. It could be learning. I use this kind of work for teaching students in my classroom how the velopharyngeal system works and have them be the velopharynx with a partner, or it could be what we're talking about today with speech and language goals and objectives. One other program that we started, and it's my student unfortunately graduated in August, so I'm hoping that somebody else gets to pick up the torch. Is a program called Speech in the Spotlight, which was bringing this together, bringing music together along with those specific hand movements. So thinking of where you have, if you're listening to this, imagine a finger kind of going along an arm, or kind of that tight finger gesture pinched outside, streaming in front of your mouth. So that mirroring movement, but with song. She was a music performance. She had a minor in music performance while pursuing speech language pathology, and was a songwriter and a guitarist. So we found a way to mirror her loves with these research-based and empirically based strategies, and she was creating a YouTube channel with short 5-ish minute YouTube segments that would support different speech sound targets, and even thinking about things like resonance and good vocal health and things like that. So hopefully, stay tuned. Hopefully I get another student that has some similar interests that would like to pick that up. So
that's awesome. Any SLPs out there that that want to
I would love that.
I'll drop
my contact information at the end.
Yeah, that's so cool. This stuff is endlessly fascinating, and it really connects, I think, to the beatboxing. You do see beatboxers using their hands so much. And I was, hearing about this other study. They're looking at especially musicians when they hear music, and all lay people, anyone listens to music, even if we're totally still and silent, we're not making any noise, our motor cortex is still firing. We're like, we at that neural level, we're performing action, we're performing movement when we hear sound.
It's fascinating. And as we start to talk
so
about beatboxing, I was talking to one of my beatboxing friends / colleagues, Villain, and I said, I hope you don't get self-conscious, but I'm going to let you know I'm always watching your hands and your other body movements
I hope
whenever you're
now
beatboxing.
I'm like thinking about my hands. Yeah.
So that synchronization of movement and just how it's so tight for individuals who beatbox. And it's definitely performative, but it's really it's internal too. Like that connection to music and body movement definitely is there. But for beatboxing, it's that speed of which you're moving as well is, like, for me, it's really fascinating to watch that.
Absolutely.
Too.
We forget, as I think, people thinking about speech and language all the time, which is mostly invisible. We forget that learning is embodied, and really it's something that we can't separate ourselves from.
Yeah.
There's this cool stuff. Sorry, we're getting a little off topic, but I just think this stuff is so cool and interesting, and it's all related. And I think it's helpful information for SLPs as well. But all of our, even at the language level, there's this CogSci researcher by university that I went to undergrad, George Lakoff. He talks about metaphors and metaphors we live by. It's about how, basically our bodily, schemata help us understand the world. And so they're reflected in, even our language structures. So, when you say, like, even if we were say, oh, we have to move this podcast from yesterday to tomorrow, that from and to are spatial metaphors that we use without thinking about it. And so, like, everything that we do and we say, it's all deeply rooted in the body. And so that this gesture and the movement, it's just such a critical piece of learning that I think we tend to not think about, and we forget, and we push to the side as if it's not important. But I'm so glad that you're taking up this research to kind of show how critical and important this stuff is.
Well, I'm certainly not alone. And Gary, I'm just reminded, I think we had these deep kind of conversations within the first 5 minutes of our first connection. So I could do this with you all the time. So this is a joy.
Well, that would be lovely. Before we go off into more interesting abstract land, I do want to get to some of the beatbox stuff that we've done together, because I think this is so cool and so practical for so many SLPs. I know that you wanted to talk a little bit about some of the studies, some of the research, but maybe we can give just a quick overview of beatboxing. What is it for people?
Yeah.
So for all the SLPs that don't know,
right.
Yeah.
That was going to be, I actually wrote down, I had very few questions. I was like, ask Garrett. I was like, ask Garrett to demonstrate and to, So in full disclosure, I am not a beatboxer. I'm not a musician either. I very much appreciate music, and I do a lot of, I've done my fair share of scholarship with a music theorist that I'm still close with. And as I mentioned already, Dr. Daly that I do work with, and then in this realm in beatboxing, but I just have a deep appreciation for those connections and for you guys and what you do as performers and theorists. But I also wanted to mention that one of the biggest things that we talked about for our ASHA presentation, and this will be helpful for you to give some of this demonstration and describe beatboxing, is to make it more accessible for speech language pathologists and other professionals. And so I have, you kind of have to get over that immediate hump of, like, what am I going to do with my articulatory system? And I'm going to have fun with this. And there's no real right or wrong. Especially in this kind of setting that we're going to talk about. So even though I'm not a beatboxer and I'm not a professional musician either, that this is something that is definitely accessible and definitely something that SLPs of any type of setting and any type of background and any type of caseload that you're working with can hopefully find to be helpful. But
totally.
Go ahead, Garrett.
And
What do you want?
like our colleague Chesney, who's like a professional beatboxer, theater arts extraordinaire, always says, if you can say the alphabet, then you can beatbox.
Correct.
So I'm also too, I'll say that I'm not a beatboxer. I can do a little beatboxing. One of my really close friends that I met in Boston while I was in grad school, he was street performing. I just went up and said hi, and we became really good friends after that. His name's Gene Shinozaki, and he was a world champion at some point beatboxing. He taught me a few things, but I'm really not a beatboxer either. So at the beginning, I was really nervous to try this stuff because it looked so crazy when you hear the professionals do it. You're like, I can't do that. I'm not a musician. I'm not a X or Y. I can't sing. I can't hold a melody, but it's okay. In fact, that's almost helpful when you work with clients. I think one thing that we talked about before is that it really like opens the door, it builds rapport when you try something and you're not so good at it, that like, lets your client feel comfortable. And also, sometimes it's good to flip the tables a little bit where the person you're working with can become the teacher. So if they really like beatboxing, they're really excited about it, they have the chance to teach you something. Like, how often does that happen? Usually we come in and we're like, learn this thing that I'm teaching you. But, sometimes it's good to have that flip side. So beatboxing is using the oral mechanism. So the things that, our teeth, our tongue, our articulators, the shape of our mouth, to create drum sounds. And it was born out of hip hop culture. So back in the 80s, it was one of the 4 pillars of hip hop. So it was included in them, at least breakdancing, DJing, rhyming, graffiti. And it really started because at that time, Roland, which is a music instrument, like digital instrument creator, was putting out these drum machines that they're called beatboxes. And kids, in the hip hop culture, wanted to make these sounds, and a lot of them not having the money to get these beatboxes, would like try to make them with their mouths. So it was a human adaptation of technology, kind of. So I just think it's so cool. I could do the easiest way to start is with, the words boots and cats. You might have heard this before. Boots and cats and boots and cats. But once you start to take off some of the vowel sounds, you can make it, you can use the phonemes themselves and practice them. So something like that. I don't know if you can hear it. Sometimes the noise gets removed. But using these phonemes to practice these patterns is kind of the same thing that we're doing in speech. We're using the same fundamental building blocks to create speech. So I just think that it's such a cool tool to use these rhythms and these patterns in music to make speech practice more engaging. So yeah, I'm curious. When did you first learn about beatboxing?
It would have been about 2018. I was connected by a colleague to our mutual connection, which was James Kim which was Bridging Education and Art Together at the time. And it was kind of at a good time because I was preparing whenever we first met, and this idea of beatboxing and, thinking about how it might have some connections to speech language pathology. It was probably October or November, and I was preparing for a sabbatical that following semester. And so whenever I said it was at a good time, I was at a space where I was at a time in my career, right that moment, to have some freedom to think what's next and to think outside of the box, literally outside of the box a little bit. And so then I thought, let's do some reading and think about, like, yes, this could be engaging, right? Because again, we're going to talk a bit about this because that's an important aspect of bringing music into therapy of any sort, including beatboxing. It's engaging, it's fun, but we also, as professionals, have goals and objectives that we are meeting for our patient family-centered care that we're providing. And so digging into, so what is this potential connection other than it being engaging? What is the potential connection? And in my area, as you mentioned, in my background, I'm specifically interested in speech production. I'm interested in all the things, but in speech production, which ties in nicely to what you just said, this repetitive practice of producing movement of the articulators, and then thinking even about the non-word kind of aspect of beatboxing and what that means for principles of motor learning potentially, along with some other theoretical principles, and how that combination of it being an engaging activity along with having these connections to the underlying mechanism of speech production, but also to kind of a theoretical construct or set of constructs was really exciting. So, and at the same time, I had just a brief experience. I had mentioned Villain so quickly earlier that as a colleague of mine, that was my very first exposure to bringing beatboxing into a practical application in my world. And what was that? We had worked together along with a couple colleagues of mine at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, who are faculty sponsors for our Best Buddies chapter at Duquesne University. And if you're not familiar with Best Buddies, it's a national, if not international, organization, both in high schools but in college settings, where there are young adults and sometimes not so young adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are matched and paired with a buddy who is a college student. And they maintain that relationship at least through college, but I can tell you it usually lasts longer. And so what we had done is we worked together because we thought it'd be a really good experience to create a beatboxing showcase for one of their weekend activities and to see how that went. But we also did a little bit of research on that. It was focused on the perceptions of the college buddy, the college student buddy, and to see what they thought, if their buddy continued to talk about it, if they seemed to be engaged in the experience. And this is a ballroom full of individuals. It's a very large Best Buddies chapter. And honestly, that moment was just a kind of a fun side project again for me, and like to see what we could do and do a little data collecting with my student, who is Catherine Pickard, still is Catherine Pickard, who's an alum now. And it was really transformative for both those who were beatboxing and those of us who were watching as professionals, because it was just just a phenomenal experience. It was fun, but people were kind of not only dancing and having a good time, but really having some of those social connections as well. And then also for these young adults who communication sometimes is challenging, to really play with sounds, to have that opportunity to, socially engage with production of these sounds, but again, that there's no right or wrong, and just having that experience together is like, wow, that was a light bulb, maybe not moment, but hour and a half for me. That said, this is this. And it was also just really joyful, to have that kind of experience. And kind of long-winded response to that question.
It's hard to make, speech joyful like that. And awe-inspiring. There's this other book that I was reading recently called Awe, where this UC Berkeley professor talks about like all of these, calls them the 8 wonders of life that reliably produce the physiological emotion of awe in people. And music and collective movement are two that reliably do that. And so, one thing that I'm like thinking about more and more is like, the problems with attention that kids have in speech, and I think probably any SLP that's here knows or has felt that over their time, that kids' attention spans, it's harder and harder to gain kids' attention. There's like a host of reasons for that, but principally, screens and things becoming more addictive and ubiquitous and super, super engaging. It's hard to find those things that will break you out of that. But I think music is one of the things that does that. And beatboxing is a really easy way to do it. You don't need instruments. You don't need anything else. It's just you and your voice, and you can make a rhythm with somebody and have fun.
I was just pulling, on my computer, I pulled up a couple of our pieces of work, and I was trying to remember what the scale was that we used for this. We later did a second study, which we can talk about if we have time. But we slash initially, whenever I was starting to write up some of this, summarize the literature and the theory, this is related to our conversation. I was like, okay, engagement, that's really important. Like, how do I measure engagement in speech therapy intervention sessions? I was like, where's the literature on that? And then I was like, no, really, where's the literature on that? Where are the dependent measures for thinking about engagement in our intervention session? So that actually became a secondary aim of this work, is to be focused on beatboxing as that medium into speech therapy and the integration into speech intervention approaches. But I was really curious about how to use some of these metrics and kind of observational tools that were used, and so like mental health or other forms of rehabilitation, but how to bring that into speech. So
that's so critical.
It is, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
We have to study it too. We can't just be like, I think it's better. I think their attention is, heightened, or their engagement is greater, but there's ways to empirically study that. So hopefully there's more of a movement of that's happening.
Well, thank you for doing this important work.
Are you taking advantage of our new amazing feature? The Certificate Tracker. The free CE Tracker allows you to keep track of all of your CEUs, whether they are earned with us at speechtherapypd.com or through another provider. Simply upload your certificate to your registered account and you're all set. So come join the fastest growing CE provider, speechtherapypd.com.
I wonder, looking at some of the other musical activities, that are similar. I think there's something special about everyone. And you mentioned dynamic entrainment earlier, but this rhythmic entrainment that happens when you're all on the same beat, all on the same rhythm. I was looking at this really cool study recently where they were having people clap on the same beat as the facilitator of the study, and then one group didn't clap on the same beat, and then right after they clapped together, the facilitator would drop a pencil and like to feign that they needed help, and then the people that had clapped on the same beat with the facilitator were significantly more likely to pick up the pencil for them. And they did the same thing even with babies who were more likely to try and help and pick up a toy and create a social bond with those that they had been let's say rhythmically entrained to, so that they had all been on the same rhythm. So I think there's something really special too about beatboxing in that way, and that it creates a social bond.
Right. And I know that you have some really great examples of how you have integrated beatboxing into early intervention and then across different ages, but as young as early intervention. But I've given some thought, and going back to the communal move, kind of that's thought about being in a group setting. But so often, especially in school-based settings, working on speech production goals and objectives is in a group setting. And so having this opportunity to perform music together, but specifically beatboxing, and I don't know if you want to talk about like live looping, which we can, have apps for, and even things like that. But this idea of building on each other's sounds and in performances, and having that social connection while also still getting repeated productions of what your targets might be, because we can certainly move into other sounds beyond our hi-hats and our kick drums and our pop butts, and where we can do our rickies, and we can do a variety of our maybe more late acquired sounds. We can make any sound into a beatboxing target, right? That's
important.
Maybe not always, might have to think through it a little bit more, but hey, most of us are complete newbies at beatboxing anyway, so why not just do it all from the beginning? But that idea of being in that group setting, and that's how you're working on as much mass practice as possible, going to principles of motor learning, blocked, mass, however you want to organize your actual practice, but then having fun with it in this group setting at the same time. I just really think that's has some real, positive, potentially positive impacts in those kinds of settings, especially school-age children and beyond.
Definitely, yeah. Totally positive impact for school-age children. I'm thinking about all the groups that I had, and it's so hard when you get a group together, like this time works, but this kid's working on, social goals. This kid's working on how do I work on all these things together? And potentially, like you're saying, beatboxing is a way to do that. We were just talking about how it has some effect on social cohesion, working together in a group. You're forming a band together, trying to create loops together, and then you're also getting this rhythmic, repetitious practice of these sounds. So you can potentially do a ton of things with beatboxing and group together. Yeah, I don't know if people are interested. Maybe before we get to a few practical examples of beatbox in a group or in individual sessions, maybe we could talk a little bit about the specific work research that's been done on beatboxing, because there has been all the stuff we're talking about that's related, how music is beneficial for speech and language, how rhythm is beneficial for speech and language. But, what about the actual, have there been studies?
Limited, as you might expect, but yes. I'm sorry. The most frequently cited work, and because it's also some of the only work that's out there, is from our colleagues, Dr. Mihail Icht and her colleagues at Ariel University in Israel. And then they were part of our ASHA presentation, even though they didn't travel from Israel in 2022. We were grateful for them to be part of that presentation as well, and have been part of some of the work that we've done in a collaboration. So they've done that work. They call it a beat talk technique. If you want to look up their references, and I'm happy to share any of this information or the citations too. They have a couple studies, and the long and short of it is they were working with adults who had motor speech disorders due to cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and were in a day setting where they were having some programming. So they came in and they had more traditional speech therapy approaches and then speech therapy with beatboxing essentially integrated. And they looked at overall ratings of articulatory accuracy. And then they also look at vocal parameters as well. So loudness, overall amplitude, and also perturbation metrics. And, at the story, if we're talking about, and I said those are frequently cited, it's because they did find that there were positive implications for these adults who, with more significant implications and effects for both those vocal parameters and judgments of articulatory accuracy if beatboxing was integrated. And so they're continuing that work in Ariel, although, with some challenges right now. We're part of work that we were doing at Duquesne. The data was being collected at Duquesne, but again, in this collaboration, this started during COVID. And so where we're like, we want to continue this work and be a little bit more, we used a different design. We used a single subject design so that we had 4 young adults who had a diagnosis of Down syndrome, and were, still had some residual speech sound errors and some vocal goals that they were working on as well. And we came together in a virtual environment. That's why I mentioned this is during the pandemic. So we had a beatboxer who goes by Galush. And then there was a speech language pathology student, and then a very experienced speech language pathologist that were part of those sessions. And it was the best way to spend a summer. So I would kind of lurk on the Zoom and I would take over sometimes. So with these young adults, we measured, of course, engagement, and overwhelmingly our measures of engagement were incredibly high for all 4 of those participants. We also did some qualitative study as well, in doing both interviews with the young adults, but also their parents, who get some feedback about the experience. And then we did some, both our colleagues in Israel, they did some acoustic measurements of those vocal parameters. And then we did some intelligibility ratings, and then also narrow phonetic transcription for targets that they were working on. And so because of how research goes, we're still doing some work with the data, especially at that more narrow transcription and analysis, because you mentioned a lot of the different hats that I now wear in my department in the last 2.5 years as I've taken on more leadership roles. But The acoustic variables we didn't notice over these 10 sessions. So we had some baseline sessions, we had 10 sessions weekly with that crew that we just talked about, and then we had some follow-up baseline sessions. So those vocal parameters didn't really change. So those loudness measures and perturbation and things. What we did find, though, is that there were some significant effects in terms of effect sizes for the intelligibility measures. At least for, I believe it was 3 out of the 4 participants. And so we want to dig in more to that data. But there's definitely more to be done with different types of designs. But that's just one example of what we were kind of working on lately. And yeah.
So that's great for all the SLPs out there looking for, ways to support maybe working on beatboxing for an IEP goal. Here's some research that you could turn to. And I think there's just so many different ways that you can also weave beatboxing into already evidence-based approaches, let's say. And we know that, first of all, doing things that kids find engaging, building rapport, just even those basic things are so critical.
And we keep using the word engaging, and that's true. But I'm now have those 4 young adults at the forefront of my thoughts right now. And what was really great is how individualized it could be. And I could name drop all the different artists that they were interested in, but they would take turns and see like what kind of style they were interested in that week. They would build their band, and they culminated in a show for their families in that last session that they were working towards. Great. And of course, they have different levels of, just like anybody, right? In a group of 4, you're going to have just a variety of willingness to kind of put yourself out there. But by the end, they were just this tight group after these 10 sessions of working together. But it's that individualized nature, but that engaging part, like this is still kind of cool, right? I mean, it's not kind of, it is cool, right? So you're working with potentially students or young adults who are watching hip hop in hip hop culture, both on YouTube videos with beatboxers, and there's a big presence, right? And of beatboxing and music and out there in mediums like the YouTube. How about that? Like YouTube, right? And so it is, even though it has roots as far back as the 80s in the States, but even using percussion like sounds and other in global parameters goes way back, right? So it's not a new medium of moving your articulators, but it is really powerful for being relevant, I guess maybe relevant and fun, right?
Totally.
And cool.
It seems to be more in the forefront of popular culture. Maybe not forefront, but it's definitely you can see it in the Disney Pixar movies like Turning Red and stuff like that. They had the beatboxer, and I think just more and more people know what it is. A lot of people, I think probably 10, 20 years ago wouldn't have known what beatboxing was, but now it's definitely becoming more.
And I don't want to get us too far off field from beatboxing, but you just mentioned Turning Red. We have 3 boys, and our 16-year-old was doing a paper. He had to do a research paper, and on his own, I mean, maybe it's like, because he hangs out with me a little bit, he decided to do his paper on the impact of music and how that impacts your mental well-being and how it impacts your studying and learning. And actually, it's because he listens to music all the time whenever he is both working out or whenever he's doing homework or whatever. But the connection to Turning Red is he was really trying to find an example to make this relevant to whoever was reading it or whoever he was presenting it to. And we started talking about Coco. And
cool.
Right. And that the whole movie is about prompting memories based upon music. And of course, that emotional connection. So anyways, I just thought I'd share that.
Music is so powerful. I wonder if maybe we can just give a couple of tools to everyone that's listening, beatboxing, you don't need anything. You can really just make up some that you're working on and turn it into a rhythmic pattern or a phrase. Let's say your kid's working on the K sound, then the easy boots and cats is helpful. If they're working on, I don't know, and a TH sound is a tough one, right? We've done there's a phrase, bots and thoughts, that we used in our little program, but you can turn that into, you can use just the sound itself. So really, you can go anywhere with that. If you do feel that you need help, there is one. I mentioned no non-financial disclosures. This is kind of a non-financial disclosure, but we did. Heather mentioned before that how we connected was through this company called Beat, Bridging Education and Art Together. And I helped them develop a curriculum for beatboxing, which is now totally free on YouTube. And so you could just pull up these YouTube videos, and we can provide a link to that later. And then it has all the lessons for to work on essentially all of the different sounds that you might be working on with your kids. So that's one. Do you have any to mention that have been useful, or that you've seen clinicians or students use or be excited about?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just always thinking about those residual speech errors. Not always, but in this context, I'm thinking about school-aged, or I keep mentioning adolescents and young adults that we might be spending time with as well. So ways to get our sounds and our affricates, right? So our and
those ones are
and of
tricky.
Course our roaring sounds are those rhotics are definitely something that we're always working on. But we kind of, yeah, exactly. That I already did that, like, and getting that rhotic, but in a way that is atypical. But I like to also think about, depending on what the underlying motor contribution is. So if there's a motor planning contribution, and maybe along the lines of childhood apraxia speech, so still thinking about moving beyond. I think it's important to point this out, keeping those targets beyond an isolation level, right? So that's kind of a benefit of beatboxing too, because even if you're doing that, you're really moving in a fluid way, still across syllables, or at least across those sounds. But I would want to still think that through, so that if we're working on kind of that fluid movement across sounds and sequences, that we're pairing it with vowels as well as best as we can. So, yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
that's always important. The generalization piece is key, and thinking about how to work on these things in a hierarchical way. And there was one little anecdote in one of the videos that we had helped put together that I remember. It was Kayla, a famous beatboxer, but she was working with a group of kids and was teaching them sounds, and then was saying, hey, when you say this sound, it's so clear when you're beatboxing, and it's, why don't you use that in the word? And she said that there was this light bulb that turned on, that, I can use the big k sound when I'm saying cat, or, whatever word that they were trying to say. And so making that generalization to regular speech is also critical, something to think about.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's also a couple of other things that you mentioned before, the groups. There's a few really cool tools, activities, I'd say, to use for groups. One of them is beatboxing orchestra. So it's kind of like what you were mentioning, putting a band together, but you're weaving in all of these things together. So if you have each person represent a particular sound in the group, and they all have to come together and make a rhythmic pattern. Maybe one person's the kick drum, one person's the snare, one person's the hi-hat, something simple like that. One person's doing a trumpet sound, maybe whatever sounds they want to make. There's no wrong sounds in beatboxing, but you can have everyone go together, make a pattern together. They can start to figure out what patterns they want to do together, if they want to do it along to music. So you're working on, social goals as well, trying to work together as a group. Just that built-in rhythmic entrainment that happens that makes people tend to be more pro-social. And then also, working on these speech sounds together. I think that's one way.
Yeah. Sequencing goals and turn taking goals. And
yeah. And there's also
we're talking
rhyming.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we're talking a lot about speech production, but I'm sure as individuals are listening to this, I would encourage them to think about a current client, student, patient that they have. And even if they're not focused, maybe right now, especially if they're not focused on speech production goals and objectives, like how you might use a tool like beatboxing to
definitely
help meet those goals.
And speech therapists being, such creative people as we are, have a lot of different ideas. So I'm always really delightfully surprised by what clinicians come up with. So, just wanted to ask you a couple of real important questions.
Okay.
If you could take 5 albums with you on a desert island, what would you take with you?
Oh my gosh! So these okay. So we're going just like this is my own personal interest now.
This is personal interest. This has nothing to do with.
Oh my gosh!
Beatboxing or speech.
5 albums. Pretty much anything by Radiohead, but I'll go with Kid A.
Love it. Fantastic album.
I would choose Disintegration by The Cure.
As well.
Probably again anything by 9 Inch Nails, but I'd have to think about which one. What else? I'm like dating myself too, but I'm really into Iron and Wine right now as well. So maybe an Iron and Wine, and then I don't know, so much good music. We just discovered the love of vinyl. So I'm like thinking through my head, like literally what album would I like to take with me? And I'm a big Doors fan. What's the album with Spanish Caravan on it? I can't remember. I know.
I would have to know. I'd have to look it up.
But, so those are good questions.
That's a classic to bring on Desert Island. Radiohead's up there for me too, for sure. Probably In Rainbows. That was such a great album.
So great.
And then what's your go-to karaoke song if you had one?
Oh my gosh. Well, I have actually what did we sing? Oh, what is the Journey song?
Don't Stop Believing.
Don't Stop Believing. So yeah, we sung Don't Stop Believing at whenever I became department chair. We had a retreat that was hosted by an individual that is a friend of the School of Health Sciences, and there was a karaoke competition, and so it was a limited collection of karaoke songs at this competition. So we chose Don't Stop Believing or Believe In, and the chair of occupational therapy and I sang it, and we won the competition. Nice. So it was such an odd experience though, because I have been in that leadership role for maybe a week. So I was definitely not comfortable, but if you're not challenged, you're not changed. Right. So it was a fun way to push out. And then we were validated and we have that memory that we kind of trauma bonded.
The power of music. Yeah. And
exactly. Right.
What a great way to open a door, Sometimes we can get, when we feel like we're in this role, and I feel this too, then it's hard to make a strong connection. I think music breaks open doors for people. I know being in Japan, a lot of work is very rigorous and strict for a lot of the companies, and so everyone goes out to karaoke after, and it's just this way to like let loose and kind of break down certain boundaries.
So what about you? Cool. We can talk about your 5 albums later, because I'm sure that's a challenge for you to identify too. But what about your karaoke go-to?
Karaoke go-to. Well, I'm. Ah, man.
And do you karaoke in Japanese or in English when you're?
I do both. I have a couple of go-to Japanese songs, but I'd say for I flip between. There's a couple Disney songs I really like, and there's a couple rap songs that I always go to. Yeah, Kendrick Lamar. All right, and then the Mulan song, "I'll Make a Man Out of You." It's a classic.
Love it.
Yeah, maybe those two. I haven't gotten the flip back question. I wasn't prepared for it.
Sorry. Hey,
that's another challenge. So I just wanted to give a couple of minutes for people. Does anyone here, I don't know if I can even see participants, but if anyone is had any questions, they're more than welcome to ask in the Q&A box at the bottom, or while we're just kind of finishing up and talking. Do you have any other advice for SLPs, either young or even experienced, wanting to use music in speech therapy? Do you have any advice for them?
We are most successful when I'm going to think about a professional, but I think this is a life statement too, right? But whenever we're flexible, whenever we're fun, whenever we feel like we're being successful. And I think that music, in addition to all those things that we talked about, those social connections and enhancing learning and retention and so on, right? And meeting goals and objectives that we have, but that connection of being fun and flexible and success-based is great for all of us. It breaks ice, but don't be timid about just bringing it in, right? And whether you're making music yourself or going along with songs, perhaps you have to slow those songs down. There's been some nice pieces out there, right? To the time to sing. It was a CD. I don't know if it's available digitally now. It was a product that Apraxia Kids had created with some folks, including the Pittsburgh Symphony, actually years ago. But right, so just to think about how you can bring in music. And actually, I hadn't thought about this memory for quite a while, but as a master's student, I had a really profound moment in working with an individual in a skilled nursing facility who was severely aphasic and would sing happy birthday whenever we were interacting, but was not able to produce spoken words and utterances, but that's how we would have our communication exchange. And I have been fascinating with music ever since, and what that looks like for a field. So
it's amazing how music can reach into these parts of us that are really deep and emotional. And one thing that I was just musing about, I guess, was that with speech, where typically, we were saying before that there's this huge overlap in like neural structures and the sounds of speech and language and music and how they overlap. But there's this sense in that, like, when we are speaking, when we're talking, we're using it in an instrumental way, where we're representing things in order to manipulate or change the environment or get something, or communicate some idea. With music, there isn't that layer of representation. You're almost like getting directly to a source of something. And this is, I think this is going a little bit abstract and off the rails, but I think that's why there's such a huge emotional connection, because there's, with music, it's not that it just is beautiful in itself, and it can really touch people in such a profound way. And so I think that's why, using that as a way in to learn speech and language, and almost to show how beautiful like sound and patterned sound can be is so powerful.
And I'm grateful for this series that you're doing and all the work that's emerging both in our field and beyond. Funding agencies are having more call for proposals that are connecting music to human health and so on. But without bringing music into our profession and into our session rooms and our classrooms, it's almost like we're not ignoring, but it's such a huge part of people's lives and sometimes truly part of their identities, right? But even if it's not part of your identity as a musician or as a performer, it's just such a part of life. And so it seems pretty much of that next, obvious connection is to bring that into what we're working on as best as we can. That could just be even your warming up, breaking rapport, right? And what's our mood like today? And then finding a song that represents that for 60 seconds as you shake it off. And I didn't mean that to be a Swiftie reference. Taylor boys, but literally, right? That you're like getting your wiggles out together. I mean, it doesn't have to always be directly linked to this is my speech sound objective that we've been talking about for a while, but to bring in that very, again, joyful aspect and emotionally tied. And it might not be a good day. Maybe it's not that uplifting song. Maybe I'm kind of feeling that today. All right, well, let's find something that maps onto that or so. Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. And, I hope that this, and this certainly has been for me, a really joyful conversation. Always love catching up with you and hearing about what you're doing. And thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. It's been amazing. And just want to see if maybe you can tell people where they can find you really quickly.
Yeah. So thank you for this opportunity. And it's been a blast. So my last name is spelled Rusiewicz, Rusiewicz. And I can be found at Duquesne University's website. Duquesne also spelled a little bit different if you're not from the area and familiar. It's DUQUESNE. But my email address is rusiewih@duq.edu. And I really look forward to hearing from folks, and I'm happy to provide some resources, or if you want to bounce some ideas off of each other, all for it.
Yeah. Thank you so much again. And thank you. We look forward to seeing you again at another speechtherapypd.com live course.
Thank you for joining us for today's course. To complete the course, you must log into your account and complete the quiz and the survey. If you have indicated that you are part of the ASHA registry and entered both your ASHA number and a complete mailing address in your account profile prior to course completion, we will submit earned CEUs to ASHA. Please allow 1 to 2 months from the completion date for your CEUs to reflect on your ASHA transcript. Please note that if this information is missing, we cannot submit to ASHA on your behalf. Thanks again for joining us. We hope to see you next time. Each episode comes with an accompanying audio course on speechtherapypd.com, available for a 0.1 ASHA CEU. And just for our listeners, get $20 off any subscription with promo code SLPLearn20. Speechtherapypd.com is run by SLPs for SLPs. They've got the largest library of ASHA CE eligible courses out there, and they're adding fresh content every week. Remember, use the code SLPLearn20 to get $20 off access to over 1,000 courses for an entire year. Head over to speechtherapypd.com for more information and start earning CEs today. Thanks for tuning in to the SLP Learning Series. And don't forget, speechtherapypd.com is your go-to for all things ASHA CEUs. Your positive reviews and support mean the world to us, and we'd love for you to drop us a quick review and hit that subscribe button.